It would be great if we could say psychedelics are 100% safe. Trust me, if this were the case, I would be the first one to tell you. But even drinking water can be dangerous in large quantities. No, I'm not comparing psychedelics to water. I'm simply pointing out that even the most simple compounds, such as water, which is necessary for all of human life, can be deadly when it's taken in excess. Traditional psychedelics, such as LSD, magic mushrooms, smoked DMT, or mescaline, come with very little risk in terms of physical danger. No one has ever died due to a direct overdose. Now, this isn't saying that it's impossible to cause an overdose that results in death. What it is saying is since the active dose is so much smaller than the dose required to cause physical death, the chances of this happening are slim to none. In the case of LSD, lysergic acid diethylamide, the active dose, which is regularly available in today's society, can be as low as 50 micrograms. The dose that's assumed to be deadly is 12,000 micrograms. That's 240 times the amount of the average dose. However, there are reports of people taking over 40,000 micrograms and surviving. The real physical dangers from buying a psychedelic in today's society is thinking you are buying one substance but receiving another. We are presently in the age of research chemicals. Although they can be safe at times, they have no empirical evidence of any short-term or long-term safety potential or danger potential. One potentially dangerous substance has become increasingly popular in the psychedelic world. Now, if you've watched my videos for any amount of time, you've probably heard me talk about it before. That substance is 25I-NBOMe or any of the NBOMe compounds. These compounds are particularly unsafe because they are active in the microgram range, and they are almost always sold on blotter paper, disguised as real LSD. The primary reason that they are so dangerous is the exact opposite to the primary reason why LSD is so safe physically. As little as 2 times the average street dose of 25I-NBOMe has caused an overdose that resulted in death. To put things into perspective, users are usually thinking that they're taking LSD, and said users are completely aware of LSD's safety profile, so they believe that they could take hundreds of tabs without coming anywhere close to dying. But in reality, they are consuming NBOMe, which has a devastating dose-response curve. The reason these NBOMe compounds have become so prevalent in today's society is because they cost dealers anywhere from a few cents to $1 per dose. They then resell them as the popular substance LSD, and then rack in huge profits with absolutely no care for human life. In the realm of research chemicals, it is estimated that there are 4 new RCs invented every single day. I don't mean to instill fear into current or potential psychedelic users, but the risks here are very real. Thankfully, there are steps you can take to remain safe and healthy, or at least dramatically increase your potential of doing so. There are drug testing kits that you can purchase online. These kits will not 100% tell you what you are taking, but they have a very high success rate of telling you what you are not taking. In the case of LSD, you can purchase the Ehrlich testing region, which will produce absolutely no color change if the substance you are testing is not LSD. But it will produce a color change if LSD or other indole-based alkaloids are detected. NBOMe is not an indole-based alkaloid, so if you do have tabs of NBOMe and you use this reagent, it will simply just not produce a color change, so you'll know that there is something up. Since the only indoles that are active at small enough doses to fit on blotter paper are LSD or LSD-related analogs, you can rest assured that the tabs are probably safe if you do get a color reaction change. Something else to note is LSD is usually entirely tasteless. At the very most, it might have a slight metallic taste, whereas in the case of NBOMe, the tabs are notoriously bitter. So if it's bitter, it's a spitter. LSD is also active when it is completely ingested and swallowed, whereas with NBOMe substances, they must be held sublingually under your tongue in order for them to be activated at all. The other physical dangers of consuming most traditional psychedelics only apply to those who have a weak heart or respiratory issues. Psychedelics often raise your resting heart rate, so those who have a weak heart are particularly at risk here. You also need to be careful if you are on antidepressants. Certain psychedelics do not act favorably with these. And finally, most psychedelics, especially the traditional ones, have zero potential of causing addiction. In fact, with constant use, the want to consume psychedelics will actually decrease. Furthermore, you build an immediate tolerance to all tryptamines and phenethylamines. This tolerance can take up to 1 month to fully return to normal, but most people say that they're about normal after a week. But I would honestly say that this is bullshit, and your tolerance will not be completely reset for at least 2 weeks. Especially if you're consuming a decent sized dose of, say, LSD or psilocybin mushrooms or mescaline. It takes a little more time than you think for your body to fully recover. And you'll notice this because if you were to, say, trip on acid every single week, your trips would get a lot less intense, and this is because you are building a natural tolerance to the substance. This means if you did want to take psychedelics, say, on a daily basis, the same way that people who are addicted to, say, crack cocaine or methamphetamines take it on a daily basis, you would get little to no return for your efforts. You would just be throwing money at these drugs that were having absolutely no effect on you. So you cannot become addicted to them in that same regard. Next, we are going to discuss the mental dangers of psychedelics. This is an area that I think most people watching this video are the most intrigued with knowing about. Here's where the real danger lies. Once you take psychedelics, you may never be the same person again. You know, all those celebrities you love following and all the gossip you love spreading. Well, imagine a life where that no longer had any value to you. I know, it sounds pretty fucking scary. Okay guys, let's get serious. No, you cannot get stuck in a trip that lasts forever. Unless you start seeing the world as the real trip and you see taking your psychedelics as your real escape out of this everyday world bullshit trip, then you might come to realize that the trip never does end. But that's just the same as living an ordinary regular life, so that's of no consequence here. I don't care whose brother's best friend's girlfriend's dog told you this. You just will not get stuck in a trip that lasts forever. And no, psychedelics won't necessarily make you think you can fly. They may make you temporarily believe that you are God, however, but this loses pretty much all grandeur when you realize that if you're God, then everyone else is also God. I mean, even that rock bouncing around in your shoe is God. Yeah, what a dangerous realization that would be. Let's cut the bullshit and just get right down to it. There actually are some very serious mental dangers that one must consider before ever deciding to take psychedelics. One of the primary dangers is whether you have a history of mental illness in your direct family or directly within you personally. It's true, we do have anecdotal evidence that certain psychedelics have actually helped those who have been suffering from a mental illness. But we also have evidence that in others, psychedelics may have worsened their state. Now, psychedelics won't just make anyone go schizophrenic. I understand that this is a huge concern for a lot of people who maybe have someone who's schizophrenic in their family. They'd be concerned that if they take psychedelics, doesn't mean that they'll go schizophrenic too. If you currently are demonstrating some schizophrenic traits, then if you were to take, say, a psychedelic like LSD or magic mushrooms, then it very well can cause more schizophrenic traits to start developing at a more rapid rate. This is something that you really do need to watch out for if you're, say, unsure of your current mental state or your mental well-being. Speaking of your mental well-being, this leads me into the huge danger with taking any psychedelics. The dreaded bad trip. A bad trip isn't like having a nightmare. You won't slowly just forget the experience. A seriously terrifying psychedelic encounter can leave the person with post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm not saying this to scare you because bad trips are not only rare, they're actually very easy to prevent. Not only that, but if you do have a bad trip, you can always use it as a learning experience and work through it, and perhaps grow as a human being as a result. I've had my fair share of what some would call petrifying psychedelic experiences, and I'm perfectly fine. Just depends what your definition of fine is, I guess. Traditional psychedelics do not work like popular mood-enhancing drugs like, say, amphetamine, cocaine, or even ecstasy. When you consume MDMA, the active component in ecstasy, what happens is a massive surge of serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine are all just surging through your brain like crazy. And what this does is it just forces you into a positive mood. You kind of just have no choice. You are, in almost all instances, going to feel fantastic. Now, a substance like psilocybin mushrooms, it won't necessarily do this. Instead, they work by taking your current mood, which is heavily affected with how you feel in your life, and it's heavily affected by your direct environment, and they will enhance that. So they exaggerate and enhance what you're already feeling. They don't necessarily give you a positive push. The term used for this, which was popularized by Dr. Timothy Leary in the 60s, is set and setting. If your set, being your emotions, thoughts, and feelings, are not in a good place, then you will have a higher chance of experiencing a bad trip. The same goes with your setting. If you are in a negative feeling place, perhaps with people you don't know, in a potentially dangerous environment, you will have a dramatically higher chance of experiencing a bad trip. By ensuring your set and setting are optimal before taking any type of psychedelic, you will greatly enhance the probability that you will have a good trip. Benzodiazepines such as Valium, diazepam, are known as trip killers. For example, if you were to go to, say, the hospital because you were freaking out and losing your shit on acid, they would give you a benzo to help you calm down. These won't entirely kill your trip. You will still experience visual distortions if you already were, but what they will do is kill the mental aspect of your experience. Personally, I do not use these. I can see the value that they have, but I believe that bad trips can teach you the most about yourself. I believe that having the ability to truly let go and not be expectation-oriented or not be positive-oriented can have the most profound effect on your life. Understanding that sometimes having a frightening experience can actually be a good thing for your growth is something that a lot of people don't like to come face to face with. I say I don't use benzos, but in the light of safety, it really is best to have these handy, especially if you're very nervous going into it. That being said, there's another even better way to ensure that you don't have a bad trip and ensure that your experience turns out as positive as possible. And that is to have a trip sitter. Simply make sure that if you are going to take a psychedelic, that there is always a sober person present, just in case things get out of hand. Having an intelligent trip sitter who has preferably experienced psychedelics themselves at hand, who knows to do things like, say, change the music, take you to a new location if you start to freak out, is just invaluable. This is a must for anyone who has any anxiety or who wants to make sure that they do have the best experience possible. You really do need a trip sitter. This is more of a must than a benzo. Now, the next mental danger of taking psychedelics isn't necessarily a danger as much as it is a myth. And I get a lot of questions about this, and these are called flashbacks. Flashbacks are the idea that once you've taken a psychedelic at some unknown time down the road, perhaps when you are driving a motorized vehicle, oh, how dangerous, you will all of a sudden start experiencing aspects of your trip again, which will make you just get thrust into a whole new psychedelic episode. Now, before you start worrying about this is confirmed to be a complete myth. And you should also know that not everyone who tries psychedelics claims to have flashbacks. In fact, it's a very low percent of people who claim to have these flashbacks. Now, what flashbacks really are actually a form of PTSD. A psychedelic experience for some can be so intense that it is forever lodged in their mind as an intense or impactful experience to them. In the same way that a loud crash can make a war vet have a flashback of a bomb going off, a small trigger can cause somebody who had a very impactful psychedelic experience to start reliving aspects of the trip and even shoot them right into the same mindset. Now, what I need to mention is usually this trigger, actually in almost all instances, this trigger happens due to an altered state of consciousness, and you don't just naturally go into altered states of consciousness unless you're proficient in meditation. So in most instances, these flashbacks happen when the person was smoking weed or taking other drugs. What I have personally noticed is after I tried a more intense psychedelic, like let's say magic mushrooms or LSD, I was no longer able to smoke weed the same way as I used to be able to as I was a kid before I tried them. Because what happened was my consciousness just got the doors blown wide open, And now I'm just a nudge away from being launched into a pure psychedelic, profound, life-changing thought adventure. So just doing something like smoking weed, which starts making my thoughts move a bit quicker, is enough to just push me over the edge, and it can make me feel like I'm having an acid trip again. But it only happens if I'm smoking weed, and this actually isn't a negative thing. This is fucking awesome. It's quite enjoyable. I no longer need to take a tab to get back to the same mental space that, acid used to bring. I can just smoke a joint, which lasts like an hour or two for me, whereas LSD can last 8 to 12 hours. So you do the math. I'd rather not commit to that long unless, it's absolutely necessary. We all live pretty busy lives. So this really is not a bad thing in the slightest. That being said, flashbacks really just don't exist at all. What they really are is just a permanent change in your perception of how you view the world. HPPD, hallucinatory persisting perception disorder, is real, and it does exist though. HPPD is when your trip ends, but your visuals do not. The sufferers often claim to see what they say is visual snow, sometimes or even all the time. They also commonly experience tracers all the time. That's where the object moves and it looks like it's got a trail following it. Now, if you are just a casual psychedelic user, you really have nothing to worry about, because HPPD is proven to affect people who take psychedelics quite frequently, a lot more often than, say, if someone did just take it once. But it can happen in as little as after one use. Now, even if you do use psychedelics, say, regularly, like 1 or 2 times a month, HPPD is actually nothing to really worry about. It is not only very rare, but it's scientifically accepted that HPPD is only a temporary effect, which will gradually lessen over time. There are some extremely rare cases of people claiming that they experience HPPD every single day of their life and it hasn't lessened at all. So I'm sure that actually does happen to some people, but this is so remarkably rare that it is just nothing that you need to be concerned with, in my opinion at least. I mean, I've personally never experienced any type of HPPD effects. I've never seen a visual unless I was on something, and I went through a period in my life where I was experimenting quite a bit, and you would think that if anyone was a candidate for getting hallucinatory persisting perception disorder, it would be moi. Now, I have saved the largest mental danger for last, and that is losing enjoyment in your everyday reality. A psychedelic trip can be both mesmerizing and seductive. Some of the visual and mental worlds that these substances can bring you to can just make your everyday life seem so trivial in comparison. I'm sure myself and other psychedelic users have experienced that feeling from time to time where we wished we could be in, say, the trip all the time, where we wish that that was our waking reality and not this mundane reality. Now, it's not necessarily mundane, I'm just using that because perhaps if you're thinking the trip's so great, everything else might be mundane in comparison. Now, I realize that perhaps that will happen. Perhaps I will be in a never-ending trip when, say, I die. So there's really no rush to experience this. A good way to counteract these feelings are to remind yourself that you are here experiencing what we call life for a reason. And that reason truly is whatever you want to make it. So make a few damn good reasons for yourself and don't get too carried away. In my early days when I first discovered psychedelics, I definitely got carried away. But like I said at the start of this video, they have a very self-regulating nature to them. So there really is no potential for long-term abuse or addiction. Through time, I began to use psychedelics less and less, and now I can reach a psychedelic state that is comparable to, say, the LSD mindset without, of course, the cool visuals, at least, just by smoking a joint, or even by stilling my mind. And instead of having the effect on me where perhaps I have lost enjoyment in my everyday life, they have actually allowed me to enjoy my everyday life a shit ton more than before. They helped open my eyes to the infinite amount of beauty that each and every moment can possess. That because life is finite and delicate, it is beautiful. And if, say, it did last forever, it would just be tiresome and drab. Sorry, I'm going a little off topic here, but I need to reiterate again, losing enjoyment in everyday life is not a common effect of taking psychedelics. Many people are happy that their trip has ended, and they're equally excited to take the lessons that they learned during their experience and apply them to their everyday life. And there's an equally, if not larger amount of people who take psychedelics just for recreation, and they actually don't learn anything from their experiences. I know, people like me, who I'm very analytical and self-reflective, I can't even fathom taking a psychedelic for enjoyment. I've tried, myself and my girlfriend have tried doing trips out with a bunch of people who were taking them, who were able to just enjoy themselves and act like kids. And every time we tried this, we would experience complete and utter obliteration, where we completely died, to the point of seeing eyes everywhere we looked looking back at us, where we had to close our eyes just to get away from all of the eyes ourselves, that we saw ourselves everywhere. And we realized very soon that we are incapable of having just a recreational experience. But say for every 100 people that try a psychedelic, maybe a handful, maybe 1 to 5 of those 100 people will able to have a truly profound, enlightening, life-changing experience. And I find a lot of people who watch my videos actually, who comment, they like to tell me what, say, LSD is or it isn't, and they'll say, LSD isn't this profound trip that you make it out to be. It's just, a fun time where I see some change of colors and I think differently for a while, but afterwards I realized it was just all a drug experience. And you know what? For them, that may be true. That probably is true. And for me, the first few times I tried it, that was true as well. I actually it wasn't just taking LSD that brought me to a profoundly enlightened state. It was actually a mixture of seeking new knowledge in my everyday life and devouring books since I was at a young age, actually trying to understand the metaphysical aspects of this universe and trying to understand even quantum physics and what energy really is. And it was through all of this that it worked as a team together with the psychedelic to push me into a transcendental state. So a lot of people who try psychedelics don't have the same yearning for knowledge that I have. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who do, but I just want to point this out because a lot of people will take, say, LSD or mushrooms, and they won't have a profoundly life-changing experience, and they look at me like I'm crazy because I say that these things have changed my life. So you know what? To each their own. To each their own. To be honest, the largest negative effect that psychedelics have personally had on me is actually both a negative and a positive, if that makes sense. It's just one of those it just is effects. And that is something I mentioned in my very last video, my trip report of taking LSD for the first time, and that is, I just cannot be fake anymore. I can no longer partake in trivial, useless conversations to people who don't say anything that holds any bearing of anything that I deem important in my life. Of course, I'm not always wanting to talk about super important philosophical discoveries. I like goofing around and relaxing as much as the next person. But holding friendships with people who might live selfish lives that ultimately hurt others is just something that I can no longer do. So I believe this holds a valid spot in my list of negative mental effects of psychedelics too. And that is no longer being able to relate to everyone in your life anymore. Now, I'm not trying to say that by taking psychedelics and, say, reaching one of these states, you are now better than, say, someone who hasn't taken a psychedelic and who just doesn't understand life in the same way that you believe you do. Because no matter where you are in life, you cannot judge another and they cannot judge you. Now, there was a time when I was abusing alcohol and addicted to cigarettes. Imagine if someone just looked at me at a bar and just, passed me off as just another drunk with, say, no direction in life. And sure, that was exactly who I was, but I needed to experience being an addict with no direction to help shine a light on where I wanted to go. Sometimes you need to see where you don't want to be firsthand to realize where you actually do want to be. So even though you may not be able to relate to everyone anymore because you've started to see the world for what it really is, never make the mistake of judging those who are not at the level that you believe you are at. Because ultimately, we actually are all equal. And perhaps those who you really feel the urge to judge are just a reflection of what you're actually judging in yourself. And if that is the case, don't beat yourself up about it, realize what you're doing, and grow from it. Everything can be turned into a lesson. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I've been sitting here filming so long, it's actually gotten dark. Huge thank you to everyone supporting us on Patreon right now. If you guys want to check that out, follow the link. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel, and if you enjoyed this video, give it a like and share it with somebody. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this vid. Till next time, take care.